There you go.
All right, that looks
Okay, everybody sees it, yeah?
yeah, we can all see it full screen. Looks great.
Perfect. Okay, so during my last assignment, I worked on Canada.ca, and since this is the government website, it's really hard to pinpoint down the specific segments and user groups and stuff that we're dealing with. In the end, like everyone and anyone is like affected by this, right? So I was looking for segments that I could group people by in order to address their specific needs. And I came across a bunch of very interesting statistics that I frankly find really shocking. And those are flying under the radar right now. So I want to present to you what I found. And in the end, I'm going to explain to you my approach, where I think that we should address that or how we should address that. So the agenda for today is basic information about diversity inclusion, just so we are on the same page. And then the duty to accommodate, because there is a mandate. The forgotten segments in education and abilities, ways to include it. And then I have an appendix where you can dig deeper later for the hard data and where it comes from and stuff like that.
Hey,
So,
just for quickly to begin with, Brenna, I don't think everyone knows you. Would you quickly want to introduce yourself?
oh, okay. I'm
Maybe.
a I'm a user experience designer, researcher in the Canadian IX team. Short. So yeah, cultural diversity is basically to appreciate that we're like all different, right? Many different groups, different backgrounds, interests, skills, talents, and needs. And yeah, with Black Lives Matter and stuff like this is like big on the screen right now. But again, like there are also some segments that aren't talked about, and they often need accommodation, right? So we have the duty to accommodate. And that would be employers and service providers have the obligation to adjust rules, policies, and practices to enable you to participate fully. I don't think that this is happening yet. I think it is still like if somebody would really poke, I think they would find ways on, point out that, it's not everywhere happening. So there are like is a list of grounds of discrimination. All right, there it is. So these are like the categories that people can feel discriminated by. And the duty to accommodate means that sometimes it's necessary to treat someone differently in order to prevent or reduce discrimination. So an example would be if you ask all your job applicants to pass a written test and there's a person that has a visual disability, it's not fair to ask them to, make a written test. So in such cases, you need to accommodate them and find additional ways on how to help them, right? So this is Ali. She is the CED practice lead in Canada. And her quote is basically a nice way of saying, like, put your money where your mouth is. There are a lot of good intentions and the words are there, but not a lot of action at getting to the source of the issue. I think the term affirmative action speaks to the practices that need to be orchestrated to get the desired outcome, right? So there's still lots to do for us, and there still need to be, there needs to be action because yeah, diversity is being invited to the party. That would be the pictures that you put on websites and stuff. You have the imagery, you invite the person, into the picture, but really the inclusion piece is like inclusion is being asked to dance, right? To fully participate, to have all the accommodation that you need in order to be part of that party. And yeah, so the forgotten segments, I expect fully to hear a bunch of jaws dropping. They are in education, and the numbers are pretty much equal for Canada and the States. And on all those pages where it is data that comes from Canada versus the data that is specific to the States, I have the little logo there, just to give a little bit more context on where this information is coming from. So I have a little bit of an exercise. So how many in 5 people can't read well enough to do everyday things? What is your guess? Oh, I gotta see if I can grab the chat here. I don't see the chat on my end.
I have it here. So guys, just put a number in there. There we go. Oh, Zach, that's high. 3 in 5 can't read well enough. I don't know if you can see, Brennan. I put 1, but we have a lot of 2s and 3s here. Another 1.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess it's.
All right.
Yeah, no one said 4.
Okay. Yeah, so it's 2 and 5, right? So that's a really high number if you think about it. Like you look at the street, you can point, you don't see it on the people's faces, but they are amongst us everywhere, right? And they're really good at hiding it. So that's why we are not seeing it, right? Okay, so a number from the next one would be from the States. So that was the literacy part, right? And here is numeracy. How many in 3 in the States can do everyday arithmetic and understand numbers in printed material? Do we have numbers in the chat?
Yeah, we have 1s and 2s. I'm just thinking put a 3 or a 2.5. Think about it. I mean, I understand numbers, yes. There we go. We have a 2.5. I understand numbers, yes. But if you really think, I have a incoming high schooler now. If I look at his math, I'm like, I'm good. I'm good. So, yeah, so 1s, 2s. I think I put a 1.
Yeah,
What?
2 in 3.
3? All right, US.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, if you have like a banking client and you're dealing with their, bank account and stuff like this, 2 and 3 would probably not be online, and they are not able to understand what the numbers on the screen really mean, right? Which is quite shocking to me. I was not prepared to see these numbers when I dug into them. And so now let's take a look at what you guys think who those people are.
Can you elaborate on the question? Who are the 50% that fall short on reading, writing, and math skills? Like,
What do you think? What's your bias? Like, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of people that can't read and write? Like, who would be that? What would be your guess who those people are?
In terms of
bias,
or gender or yeah, okay, we have great answers. Low income men, non-English speakers, that would be my guess as well. Elderly folks, because if you think about it, I hear a lot of folks who said, hey, I've been through the war and this and that, and then everything got confusing, and then I never picked it up. So these are all, uneducated, rural, low, medium income. These are good guesses.
Okay. So deep shame is felt by native English speakers because they make up about half of the people that turn to adult education group. So that would be like mother tongue, right? Like people, especially Eddie here, he's my example. So he lives in Edmonton and he spent 30 years driving a truck, and he ended up there because of his low literacy skills, right? He couldn't fill out job applications. So for 30 years, he drove a truck. And now at age, I think they said 48, he actually decided to do something different. He wanted more, and he actually retrained to become a social worker, but he had to get over the hurdle of literacy first, right? So he really, did a good chunk of work in order to overcome that relatively late in his life, right? So people are really, really good at faking it, right? They really try to hide it. That's why they fly under the radar. They're embarrassed, they're hiding it, they find all kinds of ways to conceal their handicap in this part. And when he was driving a truck, he memorized landmarks instead, right? So that's how he got by. And at restaurants, people are using excuses like, I didn't bring my glasses, I can't read right now, or, I'm too tired to read what's on the menu. Can you tell me the special of the day? So that's kind of these tricks, how they get by. And that's why we don't notice them. So the literacy gap is not limited to immigrants. So I had that bias too. I'm German. I came to Canada, and I had a bunch of issues with like catching up on the language first. But in Germany, you have pretty good education. You get like a lot of training in English and stuff. And I had the bias, and I thought, okay, they probably come from countries that aren't, where the schooling system isn't as strong as it is where I came from. So my personal bias was immigration. But in some provinces, at least in Canada, immigrants with a very high literacy score actually represent a higher proportion than the Canadian-born population. And experts say that the gap is because there was like lots of jobs in the past where people didn't have to use their reading comprehension and information synthesis skills, right? So it just wasn't utilized. So they lost that skill. But those people have been part of society and contributing the entire time, and these adults need to be appreciated the same way as the rest of society is, right? So there's this program for international assessment of adult competencies, right? This scale here, we don't need to look into this. It basically maps out, and it's in the appendix, it maps out the criteria, how people are assessed on their literacy skills. And so during the test, they perform tasks. They have different complexity. So they look at text. They need to make sense of it. They need to deduct. They need to make correlations, things like that. And based on their performance there, they get this scale. They get this level of rating. And so level below level one is the lowest, and then it goes up to level 5, which is the highest proficiency level. And if you can perform the most complex task, then you have a proficient skill. So that's how this test is done. And here's an example just for level 2, just to give you an idea of the sort of criteria that they're using. The medium of the material is defined, and then, how they match information between the question and the answers and things like that. So this entire table in the appendix goes into that detail. But based on these levels, we had these statistics. That is really the number that I showed you before in the quiz. But for that one, there was it only went up to 65 to the workforce, basically. But if you add like all the seniors to it, you end up for the Canadian market to 12 million Canadians, right? From 9 to 12. So that's a big jump as well, just to add the seniors on top. So that's the literacy in Canada, right? Like the green ones are the sufficient. So half of the Canadian population does not have sufficient literacy skills. So since you are working at IBM, we can safely assume that you probably are in the green areas on those pie charts and stuff. 33 here. 14% of Canadians scored at the highest. And then here, average of 30% of people between 35 and 65 score at a literacy level 2 or below, right? And that is, and I found that really surprising, despite having post-secondary education, a bachelor's degree or higher. I was under the impression if you have like some sort of a degree, you should be able to read and write in a somewhat proficient way. But if you're working in a particular role, whatever it is, where reading and writing isn't necessarily a big part of the job, those skills may erode over time. And that makes sense, right? Like you're old, you haven't touched like any school material in a long, long time. You haven't worked in a while. You didn't really need to make those types of exercises. You've been driving a truck for 30 years, and this information is gone, right? Like you're focused on different things in your life. And 17% function that badly that they're not even able to read dosage instructions on a medicine bottle, right? And that's really the degree of illiteracy I find that is really shocking, and that's a high number in my opinion. And this is the numbers for the states, very similar, right? No big difference there. 12% of US adults scored in the highest, and only 52 out of 100 are able to read properly. 15% at the lowest level, and I see the time's flying away. I need to hurry.
Yeah, but isn't that really interesting in how we relate it to design, especially content design and how to write for, such folks? Because I mean, we do a lot of enterprise content development, but we also do a lot of direct to consumer, development in a lot of especially in finance, I would say. And it needs to really boil down to the lowest common denominator when you communicate with people. Really interesting, and I think that's often overlooked. That's why this is so powerful. But yeah, sorry to interrupt. It's just, it's really, really hitting home.
You were right. You were right though with the with the timing. I tend to talk. Yeah. Okay. So there is obviously a reason behind it, and we might have like the reason might also be that the person is dyslexic, right? Like there is dyslexia, which is the problem of matching speech sounds with the meaning of it, right? It's called a reading disability. About 15 to 20% have dyslexia. That's 5 million people in Canada. Every classroom has about 4 or 5 students that have difficulty reading and writing. It's equally amongst the genders. And then there is dyscalculia. And that was new for me too. It is basically the same thing, just in math and in the math area. So anything that has to do with putting numbers together and that sort of logic, it's up to 10%. Dysgraphia is people that can't write, and that includes typing and spelling. And aphantasia, that's basically what happens if you cannot imagine a sheep jumping over a fence and you cannot picture the face of your loved ones, you might have aphantasia, right? And it's not that many, up to 3%, but some neurologists think that up to 5% are non-visual thinkers, right? And this here would be the solution that is somewhat easy for us to implement or to add on top for people who have trouble reading and with this comprehension. It's the easy to read standard, and that's done by Inclusion Europe. And it's good for people with intellectual disabilities. It basically shows you how you can write text for people that have those special needs in a way that is comprehensible, easy to read for them. So it could be an add-on to a website where you really have to transport some very important messaging. You can just like add on another layer of providing that sort of information for them, and the easy to read checklist can be downloaded at Inclusion Europe. And then we have the abilities, which are often overlooked and just put into the disability section, which is usually what we what we think of when we think of visual optimizing an application or something for people with visual disabilities or something like this, to use screen readers and so on. But there is actually more to that. It's not just this accessibility optimization tasks. So 1 in 10 is diagnosed with a disability, right? And then all of those, 2/3 have an invisible disability, right? So of the people that are there, that you might not see that, you might not know that. And that includes mental health, right? 1 in 5. And then you got to keep in mind that it's also not clear how many people are undiagnosed, right? In my case, I was just diagnosed last year with ADHD. I was not aware of this. I just thought I was a wild child. I heard all the stories, but dude, my daughter was diagnosed, and then like, hey, that's me. So, and while I actually test ran this presentation on some colleagues, I got a bunch of, that like, yeah, me too. So we are creative people, and I would assume that a lot of us are within the creative business, and yeah, we are here too. So mental health and COVID, obviously, COVID made it worse. That's something we need to look at as well. I fly through this here, holy crap. So 10% of adults live with 1 or more disabilities, right? So you need to stack them on top. You have 10%, and then 3 of cognitive, sensory, mental health related, physical disability, and pain related. And yeah, you got to imagine that many people have a bunch of those at the same time. And here are the general disability statistics for the states: hearing, vision, physical, intellectual. And the types of impairments. Oh gosh, 6 minutes. So mental, right? Like mental
Stress
impairment.
yourself out.
I don't
I'm
want to say
sure, or you know what, make it 10, and really don't stress yourself out. That the great
okay.
thing is here, honestly, that you're open and sort of, this is a bit of a training ground. This is a bit of a, this is an intimate group of really just creative professionals. We're all, some folks have never presented before when they're presenting here. You obviously have, but let's just be, constructive. And yeah, I think you'll have another 10 minutes, but so keep in mind, too many
Okay.
slides often ruin a good presentation, but please don't stress yourself out.
Okay. Yeah, it's not that many anymore. I just, I can talk a lot too. Okay, so you have these different types of impairments, these different categories. So we're like, this one is the mental part. So you can look at psychological disorders, mental illnesses, personality disorders. And we actually have a neurodiversity Slack community, IBM community on Slack. That would be cognitive, right? Like the cognitive sector, which would be ADHD, visual perceptual deficits, visual motor deficits, developmental disabilities, that's where autism belongs, right? Learning disabilities, that's where like dyslexia and dysgraphia comes in that I spoke about. Physical, right? Sensory mobility, that's the part that we're actually usually thinking of when we think of accessibility. But anyone could have a cast at some point in time, and you're not prepared. You don't have, if you had an injury or something like that that affects your vision, you're not prepared with screen readers and stuff like this. You wouldn't even know how to use them, right? So we cannot assume just, that everyone who actually has a disability actually uses also the assistive technology that's available for those, because they might not be aware that this exists because it's just a temporary thing, or it was a gradual thing that they ended up in this situation, and they're not even aware that there is help for them. There is recurring physical impairments, permanent ones. Those are usually the people that are prepared for using accessibility technology. And then you have circumstantial, right? Like you might be, sitting on the couch with your newborn, and you're overtired as hell, and you have only one hand available, or you're like somewhere on the playground, have your kids running around towards the street, and you're distracted, right? And you might be on the telephone with your bank or something. There's always stuff going on around you, so that might be an impairment in the circumstance due to circumstance and environmental factors. And then, yeah, sudden, right? Like you might have like an accident or something. In that case, you're in total shock. You have no idea how to fix those problems that have to do with your everyday life. Or gradual aging, right? Like what happened to me recently is like, I just realized I needed glasses. I never really thought I would. And, I always thought, it's not bad enough. But as soon as I tried them on, I noticed like, holy crap, I was that blind, So, people, when they age, it's a slow, progression into something. And that can be also progressing illness, right? Where you might not be really aware that this stuff is going on, right? And you're not prepared for this. So there are kind of standards or like recommendations on how you can make inclusive visual design, right? Like do's and don'ts for the different types of impairments and needs. I know people using like little electric tape to cover up, areas on their screen that flicker, right? So people use workarounds and stuff like that in order to solve those problems for them. But in the end, it's really just an add-on, right? Like this is really just something that we are adding on top of the solutions that we already have, that we have designed for the general public based on full abilities, right? We haven't looked at the actual needs of those groups from their angle, right? And find alternative channels maybe for them to use, right? So that is the statistics just for having it complete for physical disabilities in Canada, just because it is part, but I'm not going into this because in my opinion, they are already on the radar when you come to the topic of accessibility. So my focus is basically on those that I just presented, that are the invisible disabilities and the educational problems, right? So what are the workarounds that people use? How do they get by, right? what are the unique issues when it comes to your project, right? Like for that particular client, like what is unique to this, right? And how can we include them? And there's actually a problem with that. And how do you recruit people that aren't able to access the channel we used to recruit, right? How do you recruit people? You know, there isn't, if they don't use a website where they know already this is too difficult, and there's a pop-up coming up and says like, hey, we're recruiting for a user test or something like that, they will never see it. You will not get to them, right? How do you even ask a customer those personal questions? That's also a little bit, you know, touchy territory where you know, feel like, yeah, you know, the bank shouldn't ask that personal question. And then how would you be able to involve them if they can't use the technology, right? Especially now with COVID, we're on the screen, we know how to use WebEx, we're using Mural. Many people hate Mural, right? Like many people with cognitive disabilities, they feel overwhelmed by the amount of colors and stickies and whatnot, right? So we can't use that for those people. So the co-creation piece that we all do really well is, I still think, the best solution. But in order to build with them, we need to have them at the table, right? And in that way, the best, I think, is to build alliances with all those involved organizations, right? If that is now as an official IBM, you know, new kind of chapter that, you know, creates those relationships to those organizations, or if it is your client that, you know, does that for them, or if you do it just on a project base, involve special ed initiatives, right? Like parents of special needs citizens, ESL schools, immigration organizations, social workers, government organizations, right? Charitable organizations. So anyone really who is a SME in that area and can tell you about those people, how the workarounds, what workarounds they're using, what their pain points are. And those that actually also can connect you with those people, right? Like they have a community that they can tap into. And the segments obviously to look at is at the vulnerable level is like seniors, like low literacy, English as a second language, cognitive impairments, right? Motor impairments, we had that. And this is a bunch of ideas that I had for the Canadians, right? This is a very Ontario-based list, but it's just as an inspiration on, you know, kind of organizations that you could involve, right? Public library, you know, if they have like adult literacy classes or something like this, you might be able to talk to a teacher there. And yeah, they obviously should be involved, the SMEs, right, with our classic design thinking approach. I think also what is beneficial is that they probably have a lot of hard data about their clients, right? They have probably a lot of statistics that we don't. And, you know, just take a look and ask them like whether they would share their knowledge with us. So we, you know, have already a big advantage when we get started with something like this. And important again, like sponsor user accommodation, right? We want to make sure that we have them fully involved and that they don't feel uncomfortable in our workshops either, right? Like if you're having a sponsor user there, make sure if they are not able to write themselves that they bring somebody that can help them put the stickies down, or however you want to design the format of your workshop, just make sure that you can consult with the SMEs first to make sure that this is an accessible piece that they can actually really participate in, right? So it's another layer on top on our research, but I think it is very worth doing. And then this is a grassroots thing that I just started, and that was, yeah, this came from my own eureka moment when I understood, like, hey, you know what? I didn't know I was, you know, neurodivergent, and all of a sudden I started researching all this stuff and found the Slack channel at IBM and thought, like, hey, we need to have people that actually can look at our work from that angle as well. We can't recruit otherwise. So I started recruiting IBMers on a MailChimp site, basically, that are, you know, that gave me the thumbs up. They said like, yes, I want to help you in the future. And then in the end, I opened it up to the general public as well and recruited people. So we have about 60 people now on the IBM iX Ally MailChimp site that we can screen by the criteria here on the right-hand side, right? So if you have a project where you would like to get feedback from people that are you know, on the spectrum, or that use screen readers or something like this, I have that mailing list. Contact me. We can send out a recruitment letter and see what kind of feedback we get. It's the first step of including people. Obviously, it does not you know, make up for the people that you should invite from the different organizations and stuff, because here, as you can see, this is mostly IBMers. It's people that are able to fill out a form like this, that are able to respond to a CTA like that. And that is not the same people, obviously, that we need to involve when it comes to literacy issues, right? So this is really just like, you know, one angle at it that I can offer you for your testing. And I made it through in only 5 minutes extra.